So the 20-minute neighbourhood concept kind of basically looks at all your basic needs being met within a 20-minute walk, wheel or cycle of your home. So thinking about access to health and social care, shops, work hubs, places to socialise, green space and housing. It's gained a lot of traction internationally, and it's been developed in places such as Melbourne, Portland and Paris. Recent reports are suggesting that a lot of cities in Scotland are focusing on 20-minute neighbourhoods. So there's been some work around Glasgow and Edinburgh. And we think it's really important that within all those discussions around a 20-minute neighbourhood is a focus on inclusion and accessibility, and really about how everybody's needs can be met within their community. So during the pandemic, there's been a shift, much more of a shift towards thinking locally about the importance of the assets within your community and what's available to you. Our homes have become ever more important during this time. Lots of people have been undertaking home improvements to kind of improve the space that they live in. And it's really vital that within a 20-minute neighbourhood, there's a good mixture of accessible housing and options for everybody. Also that there is enough housing for everybody and that everyone's needs can be catered for. Also the importance of connection and the sort of reducing isolation and loneliness. So all of these themes have become really important to us over the last 18 months. And it's something that I think when we talk about 20-minute neighbourhood and what we'd like our 20-minute neighbourhoods to be like is something to think about it. And also to think about the different identities we hold within our communities. So we obviously interact with our communities in different ways and have lots of multiple and intersecting identities which are important to the way that we experience our community.
The council published its 20-minute neighbourhood strategy in June. This was based on our new business plan, which basically acknowledged that we need to look at some of the strategic issues in the city, such as poverty, well-being, climate change and sustainability. And really, through the pandemic, we've realised that the importance of those livable neighbourhoods has become completely clear, and it's key to looking at all those issues. We very much want to say it's not just the council owning it. We need to be working with not only our public agency partners such as police, NHS, fire, health and social care, our third sector partners, but also really working with our communities, because we don't know what those communities need. And, we have to be getting into those communities and actually finding out individually what they need and how we're going to take that forward. So, empowering those communities, looking at the other anchor organisations we can speak to. And actually one of the big things we want is no wrong door. So whether it's a partner service or a council service, we want to make sure that if you go there with a problem, we can help you get to where you need to get to.
What are the things that we really need to do to make a difference? And I guess probably one of the big conclusions from it is we need to sort of think about how we plan for places in a different way that goes beyond planning. It's actually about the place and all the things that make up that place. So it actually involves so many different parts of government and council to really think about the whole thing that makes up a place, rather than looking at it individually through planning applications or from a transport lens or whatever. So it all fits together in the puzzle, which is quite a challenge. So COVID really has obviously put a lot of focus on this, and I know in Scotland there's been a lot of interest, and I know the government there is looking to really implement this, but it really just showed that people were living locally. We were forced to live locally here because we had a 5-kilometre radius that we were only allowed to go to. So remote working, congestion was reduced, high rates of walking, drastic reduction in public transport, and communities rediscovered their local streets and places. So really has shone a light onto this living locally. Challenges that we really are seeing are, it did highlight that some areas don't have the access that they should. So that was really interesting. Small businesses and retail shopping strips, that kind of thing, are struggling to survive. And we did see a lot of congestion in the open space trails, that kind of thing. And that there wasn't, the people noticed the fragmentation of footpaths and bike paths and that kind of thing, because there was a huge increase in people walking and cycling locally.
So essentially, if you don't design with disabled people, you design them out of it. And one of the things that we in MAX and the Alliance and Disability Equality Scotland are particularly interested in is how do we ensure that people with disabilities of all kinds are factored in to what's happening as we move towards this concept, certainly in some of our cities.
It's essential that local neighbourhoods are linked to the rest of the city. That could reduce demand and viability of bus services in particular, so we need to ensure that these wider links are attractive, accessible, affordable and quick. Also, many people will of course still need their cars, especially disabled people. In Scotland, there are over 60,000 Motability cars and over 200,000 blue badges have been issued. Not every car user has the same opportunity to switch to other modes like cycling and walking. This is too often overlooked in many sustainable travel programs and really needs careful thought. So finally, in terms of the potential challenges, if neighbourhoods are really to work at a local level, we need a lot of improvements to the basic pedestrian environment. Really basic stuff like smooth, wider pavements, free of clutter, you can cross the road easily and safely, slow traffic and less of it, somewhere to sit, toilets. This isn't transformational, but it could really help strengthen our neighbourhoods in a practical and quick way. So it's fine to say that we want these kind of neighbourhoods, but how can we deliver them? Do we have the right policy levers and are we willing to use them? So I see two basic approaches. One, a government-led approach through planning policy, and secondly, a market-led approach, perhaps with financial tax incentives, business rates, etc. I think there are problems potentially with both approaches, and probably the answer lies in a mix of the two. Every one of us is an expert on our own neighbourhood. We all know where the puddle will form when it rains, or where the loose paving stone is that's a trip hazard, or where you need to watch out, especially for turning traffic. Is it possible that we could capture this vast amount of unique knowledge which every community holds and find a way of sharing it so that it could be used to make local streets better?
You know, community transport definitely has a role to play, especially if, you know, we're looking forward to the future where more and more people will probably depend on a form of public transport just because of aging of population and you know, people not being able to drive for X or X reason. But as you know, as the structural economy makes it that busy town centers are less and less the model that we see, it's really important to work on these more structural trends as well.
We're social animals and we can't live isolated. So I think it's a superb concept, the 20-minute neighbourhood. And really thinking about it is the need for connectors, perhaps, within a 20-minute neighbourhood. The need for people who are out walking or cycling or going to wherever green space is, that people on the ground know what's happening within their neighbourhood, that they can then suggest or signpost to someone walking in the street, or you know, that we're trained in signposting people to the local shops or what's going on in the community hall or whatever it might be.
The word accessible is bandied around a lot in terms of housing, people's housing options. And the thing that I'd want to say is that there is no one definition of what's accessible. What's accessible to one wheelchair user with one condition in a certain stage in his or her life might be completely inaccessible because there's somebody who's older, who's got a different type of wheelchair. So it's very, very difficult for us to look across the whole of Scotland, look at the bigger picture, because we're looking at individual needs at a time, if not of quite crisis, but an important time in their lives. So I think we would rather look at it as inclusive rather than accessible. And because we're a sort of pan-disability movement, we have clients who don't use wheelchairs, but they may have restricted mobility. it's quite common for our clients to have mental health problems, which are often on top of a physical disability. And usually what that means is that they want a quieter and living environment, they want some private outdoor space. There's lots of things that would make their mental health better, but they're not able to access them because there's such a shortage of suitable housing across the board in Scotland, and the pandemic's made that just so much worse. So something that person A can access and be very, very happy living there, person B, it just makes their life a misery and causes further difficulties further down the line. But the other thing I would say is that there's always room for compromise, and quite often the compromise with our clients, and the previous speaker described it very well, is in the social connections.
20-minute neighbourhoods tends, so far, a lot of the discussion has been around active travel and getting to things just generally. But actually, we've been doing quite a lot of work on dementia-friendly outdoor settings. We need to think about all these different things. So it's about 20 minutes for one person isn't the same for another. If we get it right for the least mobile, then we hopefully get it right for everybody. Existing neighbourhoods are not equally great places to live. We need to plan for people, not cars. But just following up on what Moira was saying, within the 20-minute neighbourhoods, disability access vehicles are not going to be excluded. So that's not part of any discussion that we've been party to. It's more about the general cars and vehicles. And we just need to think about having places that people actually want to be.
Often as well, isn't it, there can be an assumption about what needs to change or improve, but actually it's the wrong solution. So a lot of investment and money can go into the wrong thing, but actually if you'd done that engagement earlier, it might have been something that would have been simpler or kind of easier to rectify.
Scotland has declared a national state of climate emergency and put in place some of the world's most ambitious legislation on achieving a net zero carbon society by 2045. And over the last year, we've been exploring what designing for a changing climate means to Scotland's places, where we considered a whole place approach to the net zero carbon challenge. And our work on carbon conscious places offers examples, principles and illustrations to help guide and inspire people to support a whole place approach to responding to the climate imperative, carbon targets and their place conditions. So rethinking how we move about, how we live, how we support town centres and how we become more self-sufficient, we're able to consider different ways to address all scopes of carbon emissions, as well as adapting to the impacts of climate change. So we applied our 10 principles to a place context through looking at a typical town centre, using personas to tell the story of how it could be adapted to create a caring environment. Vehicle access is limited to key zero emission vehicles such as local buses, delivery vans and emergency services and residents with additional mobility needs. Active travel and public transport are prioritised with good access to transport and digital networks.
Whose neighbourhood, whose needs? What are the daily needs for disabled people versus non-disabled people? Older people versus younger people, people from different backgrounds, men versus women, all of those things that you might want to be thinking about when you think about diversity, about community, about inclusion. And I think the way that all those different groups exist in physical place is very different as well. So for example, disabled and non-disabled people, men and women will be absolutely everywhere. Sometimes we find that older and younger people from different ethnic and national backgrounds may live in communities, so they may be able to find, for example, sort of specific needs locally, but they may be very scattered. So if you have a sort of specific cultural background and the food that you want to eat, can you find that locally? Is that a normal daily need for everybody in your community? Are you expected to go beyond that?
It's all very well to have grand plans for 20-minute neighbourhoods. We don't want everything to be in a hub situation. We want things to make sure that the infrastructure works, to make sure people can get there. Picking up on the comment before about that kind of first and last mile, there's no point in having a fantastic infrastructure if you can't get out of your front door.
I think one of the key things is this has been a partnership approach, and working through the 4 sessions as we had, that this will need to be a multi-sectoral approach with community at its heart. And I like the idea of it being an evolving neighbourhood, really, rather than anything being pressurised onto a community, that the community owns it and evolves it itself. However, we do need to have a direction of travel, and that's where the importance of planning comes in. I think from all the sessions, ask people what they need and ask them in detail, as Living Streets said earlier, and listen to what they say and respond appropriately. And to make sure that you're asking not just, the people who pop up in communities, but you're deliberately going out to reach communities, to reach the disabled, to reach people who don't have English as a first language, and all the other reasons to search people out within community and check what they need across age groups as well. And as was pointed out earlier, access panels are a great resource for contact with disabled groups. There's been concern expressed about how 20-minute neighbourhoods would really be implemented, and the importance of joined up thinking within the local authorities. And as an Edinburgh resident, I was really pleased to hear what Tasha was describing. And I think, what we need to see here and what needs to be seen everywhere is breaking down that disconnect between policy and practice. Authorities, public authorities and private authorities have a legal duty to make things accessible, and they have to be held accountable for that. So there's so much that's come up. It's been so rich, the conversations, and today has been no less rich. I've really enjoyed it. And there's part of me thinks we need to keep this going. We need to keep this conversation going, because only by really exploring and developing the concepts and involving people will we really get it to how we want it to be.